Hey there, Otaku! Are you into retro gaming? Are you into modern gaming? Are you into video gaming? Go Mega Otaku Gamer Alpha has new episodes most Sundays right here on this channel. Check them out. Hey there, Otaku! Welcome back to another episode of Go Mega Otaku Gamer Alpha. Ken-chan here. And I'd just like to take a moment to say that today's episode is the 26th episode in this series. The first few episodes were a little rocky. I think I've got it down now for the most part. And I'm glad that you subscribed. I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that I've been able to maintain, even a little interest in this kind of thing. This is the end of the first season. So the next episode that you'll see will be the beginning of Season 2 of Go Mega Otaku Gamer Alpha. And I'm not going to say that the next episode is Season 2, Episode 1. We're just going to keep counting up 27, 28, 29, and like that. But, another quick announcement, Magos 2K6's channel is now Kenny TV. And I'm hoping over the course of 2013 to branch out a little bit and maybe offer some other kinds of otaku-type pursuits. I'm kicking around some ideas for some shows. Maybe you have some ideas. But if you do, send a message, leave a comment. Otherwise, let's get down to the show. Today's machine is the Sega Dreamcast. But we're going to look at two. We're going to look at the American version and the Japanese version. They look alike, don't they? The only difference is, of course, between these two machines is this right here. See that? Compared to that. Right there. This little thing here, it's different color. But that's the only difference. Sega Dreamcast today on Go Mega Otaku Gamer Alpha. This video is probably going to seem a bit biased to you. And it's going to be biased. I'm a big Sega Dreamcast fan. It is probably my favorite game system of all time, so far, to date. And it is also, in my opinion, the greatest console made. And as well, in my opinion, it is the father of the modern video game consoles. When it came out in September of 1999, 9/9/99 as it was, DVDs were new. There was talk of the PS2 coming, of course. The PS2 shadow was looming, and people knew that that was going to have a DVD player in it and all that kind of thing. And of course, the Dreamcast didn't have any kind of playback for anything like that. It used proprietary gigabyte discs, or GDs, to store the games on. But nonetheless, it had an internet connection built in. It was a dial-up connection. You could swap it out for a broadband connection that was sold separately, but it was still a cheap, easy way to get on the internet. It came with its own web browser. You could get a keyboard for it. You could get a mouse for it. Things like that made it more computery. And that's really what modern consoles have ended up being. They're closer to being a computer in your living room type thing. And the Dreamcast was really the first one to move seriously in that direction, as it was internet ready out of the box. Other systems were not internet ready out of the box. That being said, of course, as I said, it was released in America on 9/9/99. Came out in Japan November 27th, 1998. Came out in Europe October 14th, 1999, and in Australia November 30th of 1999. It was discontinued in North America on February 14th, 2002. In Europe in 2002, in Australia 2003, in Japan in 2007. Wow. The Dreamcast went on in Japan until about 2007. That's not a bad run for the little machine. They sold 10.6 million units. Not enough to keep it afloat. It was used CDs, 1.2 gigabyte GD-ROMs. The CDs, of course, that means that if you put in a music CD, you could play back your music on CD. It read CDs. The games were the GD-ROMs. The CPU was a 200 megahertz Hitachi SH4 CPU. Storage capacity was VMU and Nexus memory card. Okay, we'll look at that too. It had 16 megabytes of RAM, and the GPU had 8 megabytes. It had 100 megahertz power VR2 CLX2 for graphics. Online services included SegaNet, GameSpy in North America, and Dream Arena in Europe. The best-selling game, of course, for the system was Sonic Adventure. 2.5 million units as of June 2006 were sold. And the predecessor was the Sega Saturn. When the Dreamcast launched, it launched very, very strong. It had a very kick-ass lineup of games coming out of the gate. What ended up killing it was the PS2. Everybody knew the PS2 was coming, and DVDs were new, and despite the fact that the PS2 wasn't really built to do this, people were buying PS2s and watching DVDs on them and playing the games. The PS2 launch lineup, of course, wasn't that strong, especially when compared to the Dreamcast. We're not going to go into the PS2 much more than that right here, right now. The Dreamcast lost momentum very quickly when the PS2 was released about a year later. And by 2002, it was game over for the machine. Which is a shame, because Sega had always created very quirky, very interesting, very different games. At the highlight of the Nintendo versus Sega war, if you want to call it that, it was very clear that Nintendo and Sega had different kinds of games for their consoles, and this was continuing into the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast had some very incredible games, and we're going to look at some of those games then. But first, we're going to look at the system. We're going to look at the Japanese system. The two basically are the same, except for that little piece of plastic I showed you, and on the back, one is NTSC-U, which is in North America here, and one is NTSC-J, which is Japan. Let's look at the device. This is the Sega Dreamcast, and this is the Japanese Sega Dreamcast, which looks almost identical to the American Sega Dreamcast. I'm going to go ahead and pull out this controller here so we can take a look. You have a power switch here. When the power comes on, of course, this light switch comes on right here. There's a light right here. And I remember seeing the commercials with this section right here, and the commercial said, "It's thinking," because, you know, the idea was this thing was so incredibly powerful, it was planning its moves against you in these games. It was doing its own thing. It had its own brain. Open and close switch here. Of course, and of course here we have the standard CD-ROM type reader. You know, it fits down, snaps down over top of this, very tight. No stupid moving doors that slide in and out. You have to fart around with. Okay. 4 controller ports on the front. That's great. Now we go over here, and here's a fan that cools it. And right here, we have, of course, this is actually the line in. This is a dial-up line here. I'm going to go ahead and pull this out so you can see what this looks like under here. And this is the modem here. As you see, it's just, you push this in. I had to use 2 hands to do it. You push this in, it snaps out. And they had one that was a broadband connection. That same thing. You just buy it and you go click in where this one goes, which is right here. Okay, it's just this port that pulls right off of there. Slides right in there. Let's see if we can go ahead and snap that back in. Gently, gently. There we go. Okay, internet ready right out of the box. Some more cooling here. Here we have an AV out. Here was AV out here. Serial port here. Power. And of course, underneath is pretty sparse. It has the model number and the NTSCJ there, denoting that it is a Japanese-only machine. It will only play the Japanese games, which can be found at decent retro video game stores, or on your eBay or your Amazon or whatever you're looking for. Okay, some other notables about the Dreamcast. This was the controller here. Okay, and on the controller you have the stick, the rocker switch, pause and start, X, Y, and A, B buttons here. Okay. Trigger switches here and here. And look, there's a spot here for 2 VMUs or memory cards. Memory cards just stored regular memory. And of course you had the VMU, which was in and of itself kind of its own game system. There were at the time, cell phones were playing those little snake games and things like that. And some of the GDs that came for this system, the games, they had little mini games in them. And you could play those little mini games. You could load them up on your VMU and take this with you and play little games on them. In Sonic Adventure, for example, they had the Chow, the little baby-like creatures, look like little gigapet things, that you could actually, in the game, drop them into your VMU and then raise them. Like gigapets, you could feed them. You could take them for a walk. Okay? All kinds of crazy stuff. And you carry this around. And it had that on there. The downside of these things is the battery the batteries in these things die almost, in like a couple of hours. They don't last very long. And they're these big fat watch batteries. I don't know, you can see that one under there or not. You got to unscrew this to get this apart. It's a CR2032 battery. And actually it takes 2 of them to do this. But again, quite interesting. And those would basically, essentially, those would slide into the controller like so. You would take them, put them upside down, right into the controller slot here, and you'd snap it in. And certain games had the name of the game come up here, a little bit of maybe a little information about it, something like that. And it made for, kind of an interesting precursor to what game consoles seem to be evolving into today. Yeah, so this controller here is very similar, if you see or notice, to the analog Sega Saturn controller. This has, of course, 6 buttons. It also has these things here on either side. This nub here, which is a stick, the rocker switch, start button, buttons here. Okay, on this one, stick, rocker switch, start button, buttons over there. So they're very similar. And in fact, if you compare this to a modern Xbox controller, maybe not the 360, but the Xbox itself, the first controllers that they had for that, again, you can see that they evolved that from this. That has a second stick on it, but still very similar. If you have both systems, go ahead and take a look at that controller and compare it. I don't want to do too much of that here because I might want to do a future episode comparing controllers or the evolution of controllers. So I'm not going to really go too much deeper into that right now. But we're going to go ahead now and we're going to look at some of the games for both systems, American and Japanese. Let's start with some of the American games. Now, of course, I'm going to talk about Sonic Adventure because it was the biggest selling game for the system. I remember the first time I turned this game on and I watched this intro, I was all but moved to tears. It was so incredibly good to see the little blue guy back from his hiatus that he took during the Sega Saturn.
target, men! Ready? Fire!
Hey, I'll play with you some other time.
This, in my opinion, is the greatest RPG ever made, and it's the first RPG to have fully interactive voice acting, despite the fact that the voice acting wasn't all that great. This is called Shenmue. A little bit spastic to control by today's standards. Nonetheless, served its purpose. Oh, there's my kitty. Where is he? He's up here. Yeah, in this game you get to also keep a kitty.
You're still so tiny. How are you doing? You're so cute.
Jack Ryan Radio!
Little Jack Ryan radio for ya.
Hey, you!
On here we go with the Japanese Dreamcast, and this is Super Magnetic Neo Neo. In this country it was known as Super Magnetic Neo. And it's very Japanese. It was available in this country only for a short time. Rare and kind of hard to find is in the American version. I found the Japanese version of too many games. And of course, now we're going to take a look at Capcom versus SNK, a game that nobody thought would ever happen. At the end of the day, the Sega Dreamcast did not survive. It was too little too late for Sega. And it's a shame. Sega has legions of hardcore fans that have missed Sega ever since they stopped the hardware business. Because they had to stop making the hardware, their software has suffered. Because they have to answer to someone else's schedule now, they haven't had a decent Sonic game in years. And they probably never will again. They will probably never return to their former glory, and it's a shame. The Sega Saturn was their last hurrah, but it was still an awesome system. It's a shame it didn't do better than it did. I am completely against this idea that a video game system should also play stupid DVDs or Blu-rays or anything like that. Because you know what? Those discs are going to go the way of just, videotapes. They're not going to be around much longer either. So those little features that machines like that had, in the long run, overall, are going to really be insignificant. As far as I'm concerned, the Sega Dreamcast is still aces. In my book, it's still the greatest system ever made because it really was the father of the modern video game console. If you think about it, you'll see all kinds of similarities between things that Sega started with the Dreamcast that still hang on today. Controller design, internet functionality, of course with better functionality nowadays you have downloads of for games and things like that. Things that they didn't quite have the technology to do, but Sega was looking towards the future. They were by having an internet-ready device. Recently, there have been rumors on the internet about Sega making a comeback with another console. And of course there's always these photoshopped images of these fake-o console-looking things that say Sega on them. Don't believe that. The chances of that happening are very, very slim. Sega anymore runs on a very tight budget, and they have more layoffs than they have profit, that's for sure. They're shrinking And now they're Sega Sammy, but they're still shrinking. But anyway, take it for what it is. It's the Sega Dreamcast. The last system that Sega ever made.